How you doing there? Welcome back to Babble on Talmud. Today we're studying Daf Gimel, Daf 73 of Shechita Chullin. Friends, ooh. Okay, Daf 73. Very, very gewaldig and very awesome. It's a good thing today's Sunday. That's good. Everyone's got plenty of time today to work on Daf 73 of Shechita Chullin. Friends, the first section of Daf 73, we discuss Shechita vis-à-vis a poked out fetus limb. In our Mishnah, we had discussed a machlokes between the Chachamim and Rabbi Meir about a fetus that poked its arm out of its mother before Shechita. Now, then the mother was shechted and this limb was still dangling out. Rabbi Meir says that we treat the limb as nevela. The Chacham say that we treat the limb as treifa shchuta. We are going to have a look at some dialogue between the different opinions between Rabbi Meir and the Chachamim, which then leads to our second topic of the daf, Shechita vis-a-vis a dangling limb. Very tricky stuff. It's what's called Aver Amiduldol, a limb that is dangling off of an animal. If a limb has basically been severed from an animal, but it's hanging on by a thread. Oh boy, how do we view that limb? Yeah, we're going to see different opinions there, and how does that, and if so, how does it change the machlokas between Reb Meir and the Chachamim when it comes to a dangling limb as opposed to a limb that is poked out from a fetus? Wow, sounds tricky, right? It certainly is. Friends, come join me. I gotcha. We're going to learn this together. We're going to get it. So come join me. Let's learn Daf Gimel, Daf 73 of Shechita Chullin. Friends, we're on Daf Gimel Amid Aleph at the 2 dots, about 10 or so lines into Daf Gimel Amid Aleph. V'chacham omim maga treifa shchuta. Okay, as I mentioned in the introduction, we had seen in our Mishnah a machlokes between Reb Meir and the Chachamim. When you have a mother and an ewe, and in that ewe there's a fetus, and that fetus pokes out its arm. Okay. You then shech the mother. What's with that arm? According to Reb Meir, that arm is nevela, and it's going to be metame, the fetus, and the rest of the animal, the mother as well. According to the Chacham, once you've shechted the mother, that dangling out arm is considered like treifa shchuta. It's considered like treifa shchuta, and treifa shchuta is be'etzim tahor, and therefore it will not be mitame the rest of the fetus and the rest of the and the mother as well. However, the Gemara picks up on the point that the Mishnah says that we treat it like v'chacham maga treifa shchuta. That once the mother has been shechted, we treat it as though that limb that is sticking out and is touching the rest of the fetus and the mother. So we view it as if the rest of the fetus is touching, it's maga, it's touching treifa shchuta, as if there's some significance to the fact that it's touching treifa shchuta, i.e. that treifa shchuta isn't just completely tahor, no big deal, because then what do we have to point out? It's touching something tahor. What does it mean? Touching something tahor. So what? What's enough community if it's touching something tahor? It sounds like maga treifa shchuta, there is some significance to the fact that there is some kind of, it is touching treifa shchuta. What significance is that? Treifa shchuta mi metamya? Fact the Gemara, but like, who cares that it's touching treifa shchuta? It's not like treifa shchuta is tamei or anything. Well, actually treifa shchuta is actually tamei. In what way? Because after all, it's not nevela. So Kedavur de Shmuel, It's like Avua de Shmuel. Shmuel's father, Damar Avua de Shmuel. Treifa sheshachata. That if you have an animal that's treif, let's say there's a hole in its lung or something, and you shecht it, mitama b'mukdash, and midirabonon, it is mitame kodesh. Midirabonon, it's mitame kodesh. So if you have a korban, meat of a korban or something, and you have treifa shchuta, and it touches that meat, it will be mitame, that meat will be tame, midirabonon. So yes, midoraise, if you have an animal that's treif and you shecht it, it's not nevela, and it's completely tahor. Midrabanan as a maila asu bekodshim, that to kind of be a little bit more strict when it comes to kodesh. So the Chacham said that treifa shchuta that touches kodesh will be mitame kodesh. So when we say that the fetus will be maga treifa shchuta, that's about it. It'll be considered touching treifa shchuta, which midrabanan is able to be mitame kodesh. So now we move on to the next section of the Mishnah. Says the Chachamim to Reb Meir, right? So the Chachamim had said that, so you have this animal, and the fetus of the animal, its arm is popping out. The Chachamim say that when you shecht the mother, it's mitaher, this arm that's popping out, that it shouldn't be nevela at the very least. Reb Meir says it is nevela. That vis-a-vis this arm, you can't eat it. It's nevela. The Shechita is not mitayer. It's tummy, just like anything else that isn't shechted properly. Whereas the Chachamim say that the Shechita of the mother at least helps that it shouldn't be tummy. At least it shouldn't be nevela. So said the Chacham to Reb Meir, after all, mematzinu b'treifa sheshchitasu mitayra. So you have treifa. A treifa, you can't eat it. But at least when you shecht it, it's not nevela. It's mitayra. At least it should be tahor. So shchitas behema titayra. So it says uber, but you can change it to aver. So Chacham say, look, same thing here. When you shecht the mother, it's mitayr the aver. Now, of course, we said a minute ago that midir abanon, it could be mitame kodesh, but we're bigadol. Well, in order to be able to talk about it in a simpler way, we'll just say that it is mitayr midah raisa. At the very least, it's mitayr the aver. It's also mitayr for everything other than kodesh. Anyways, so say the chachamim that when you shecht the mother, the shechita is mitayr the aver, this limb that is dangling out. So that at the very least, it should not be nevela. Now, Tani Relin Rabbi, so Amullah and Reb Meir. Reb Meir responds to the Chacham. V'chi mi tiaro le'aver zemi de nevela. So Reb Meir says to the Chacham, okay, so you're shechting the mother, and what exactly is being mitaher this limb so that it's not nevela? Shchita simo. Well, shechting the mother. When you shecht the mother, the kosher shechita of the mother allows you to eat the mother, allows you to even eat the fetus. You can't eat the limb that's sticking out, but at least it is not nevela. But imkain tatirenu ba'achila. But argues Reb Meir, look, if the shechita is working to some extent, at least on the leg, why not work to a full extent? Right, you have this leg; it's dangling out. Right, by default, meat that an animal that's dead is nevela. It only becomes the shechita is able to be mitayr meat so that it isn't nevela. So we're saying that the shechita is also mitayr this limb. Why not say that it's also mitayr it the whole way? To say that you can even eat it. So Amulo, so the rabbis respond to Reb Meir, harbe matzelis al she'eno gufa yoser mi gufa. Esoterically, the rabbis respond, and for now we're just going to leave it as esoteric. It will make more sense as we add more context. But the rabbis esoterically respond, harbe matzeles al she'ena gufa, that which is not the animal's body, the animal being the mother, that which is not its body, i.e., in this case, the arm that's dangling out. More so than its body itself. That which is not the body of the mother, i.e. this Aver min ha'ubar. I want us to get accustomed to that term because it's going to be coming up quite a bit on today's daf. Aver min ha'ubar, the limb of the fetus that is sticking out. So the Aver min ha'ubar is not the body of the mother. And yet we find that it could be more mitayr by the Aver min ha'ubar more so than the body itself. Because after all, Shari Shaninu chotech min ha'ubar shebme'el mutter ba'achila min ha'tchol min ha'klayos also ba'achila. Because after all, we've learned that if you stick your hand into the mother and cut off the leg of the ubar, of the fetus, but leave everything inside the mother. Okay, so you have an oo, and the oo is pregnant. You stick your hand into the mother, cut off the arm of the fetus, leave everything inside the mother, the fetus, the arm, and then you shech the mother. You're allowed to eat the fetus and the arm. There's no Aver min ha'chai. It's completely fine. And yet, if the animal wouldn't be pregnant, let's say, and you would stick your hand into the animal and cut its spleen, cut a piece, right? Cut its spleen in half or whatever, or cut its kidney, and then you leave the spleen inside, you leave the kidney inside, and then you shech the mother, you're not allowed to eat that piece of spleen that was cut or that piece of kidney that was cut. It would be Aver min ha'chai. So we see that actually Shechita is more matir, something that isn't the mother, more so than it's matir the mother itself. My kamre, what exactly is this dialogue? Who's saying what and what is saying who? So Omar Ravit says Ravit, the Amri lo kedi, some say it's unattributed. There's some missing stuff. We got to massage it a little bit, and we're going to massage it in the following way. Omar loyin Reb Meir. So Reb Meir, who says that even if you shech the mother, the Aver min ha'ubar, the limb from the fetus, the Aver min ha'ubar is nevela, is tamei. He says to the Chachamim, who say that when you shech the mother, the Aver min ha'ubar is tahor. It's treated as treifa shchuta. I'm going to refer to that as tahor. Meir says to the Chacham, "B'chi tiaro le'aver ze midei nevela." What was mitayr this Aver min ha'ubar so that it shouldn't be nevela according to you? Shchitas imo, the shchita of the mother. Imkain, argues Reb Meir, if so, tatirenu ba'achila. Why not say that the shechita of the mother is even matir the Aver min ha'ubar to be eaten? Amrulo, the rabbis say to Reb Meir, they respond, treifa tochiach. Well, according to us, this is no different than a treifa. That if you look at a treifa, for example, you have an animal with a hole in its lung. So shechting the animal will be matir it that it shouldn't be nevela. Will be the shechita will be mitahir it so that it shouldn't be nevela, but it will be also bachila. It's treif. So here as well, the shechita of the mother is mitahir the Aver min ha'ubar, but you still cannot eat it. Amr loin, to which Reb Meir responds to them, Lo im tiara shchitas treifa osa davershu gufa. There's a big difference, argues Reb Meir, that when we're talking about a treifa, we're talking about an issue with the animal itself that is being shechted. When an animal has a hole in its lung, the hole is in the lung of the animal that's being shechted, the animal that is being questioned about. What's the word I'm thinking of? The animal that is being, I don't know, we're talking about. So you have an animal that has a hole in its lung. You shecht it, and we're saying that the shechita is mitayr this animal, even though it has a hole in its own lung. Titar esa aver davar she'ena gufo. But when we're talking about the aver mina uber, the uber is not part of the body of the mother. I mean, we do sometimes say, right, we do say uber yarachimo, but we're saying that the uber is an organism that's growing inside of the mother. It's different than the mother's lung. The mother's lung is the mother itself. The uber is an organism that's growing inside of the mother. And therefore, while shechting the mother can be metayr it from being a treifa, because the treifa is an issue with the mother itself. However, if you're asking me about can shechting the mother be metayr the limb of its fetus, no. So Amulo, to which the rabbis respond, actually, I'll make the argument that, yeah, certainly, actually, I could bring you a proof that shechting the mother should be metayr the limb of the fetus. Because harbe matzelis al she'eno gufa yosem gufa. Because shechita saves, it's metayr something that is not the body of the mother, even more so than something that is the body of the mother. Sharei shaninu chotech mina uber shebme'eh muter chotech mina uber shebme'eh muter ba'achila. That if one were to cut off the arm, right? If you have an ewe and the ewe is pregnant, and somebody sticks their hand inside of the ewe and cuts off the arm of the fetus and leaves everything inside the ewe, the fetus, the arm, and then you shecht the ewe, you can eat everything. Eat the mother, eat the fetus, eat the arm, everything. However, minat chol u'minat kloyis, if one were to stick their hand into a sheep and slice its spleen or its kidney and slice off a piece and leave it inside the mother, asur b'achila, you cannot eat it because it would be ever min achai. So our rabbis argue that actually we have a precedent to say that that shechita would be even more matir, something that is not the mother itself, more so than something that is the mother itself. That shechita is matir. If you cut off the arm of the fetus, shechita is matir that. But if you cut off a piece from the kidney or from the spleen, shechita is not matir that, even though the fetus, we're saying, is not the mother's body itself, while the spleen and the kidney are. And yet, the shechita is more matir the fetus than the mother, than the spleen and the kidney of the mother itself. And similarly, we learn in a brisa, which is where things get a little start to get more tricky. Reb Meir says to the Chachamim, why are you saying that this aver mina uber is not nevela? What was mitaher it? Said it should not be nevela. Amulo, they said shchitas imo. Well, the shchita of the mother. By shechting the mother, it's mitaher the aver mina uber, so that it should be tahor, it should not be nevela. Imkein, so says Reb Meir, tatirenu b'achila. So why not say that the shechita of the mother is even matir the aver mina uber? You can even eat it. Not just that it's not nevela, you should be able to even eat it. Amulo, they say to Reb Meir, treifa tochiach. Well, it's similar to a treifa. Shechita mitarosa midei nevela ve'ena matirosa b'achila. That, for example, a treifa, an animal with a hole in its lung, you shecht it, so it's mitayer from nevela. It's not going to be tameh, it's going to be mitayer from nevela, but it'll still be also b'achila, it's treif. So you're also shechting the mother's mitayer the limb, the aver mina uber from nevela, but you can't eat it. On Miloin, Reb Meir says to them, imtiara shchitas treifa osa the esa aver ameduldulba dover shegufa titire esa uber she'eno gufa. To which Reb Meir says, look, there's a big difference. When it comes to a treifa, and you shechta treifa, it's mitayirit, because the treifa is an issue with the animal itself. Let's actually skip maybe the Evra Meduldal for 1 second, because that's a whole world in itself. So when you shecht the animal, when you shecht an animal that's a treifa, so the issue is with the animal itself. However, when it comes to the fetus, it's not the animal itself, right? The Evra Min Uber is not the animal itself. So argues Reb Meir that the Shechita of the mother would not be mitar the Evra Min Uber, and it would be nevela. Amrlo, to which the rabbis respond to Reb Meir, harbe matzeles al she'eno gufa yoser migufa, that actually we can make the argument that Shechita is much more matir, something that is not the body of the mother, even more so than that which is the body of the mother itself. She'arei shaninu chotech mina uber shebme'el, that we can, if you cut off the arm of the fetus that's inside of the mother, mutter bachila, and in shech the mother, you can eat the mother, you can eat the fetus, you can eat the arm, you can eat everything. However, if you cut off a piece minatchol minakleus from the spleen or the kidney and you leave it inside the mother, also bachila, and then you shech the mother, you're not allowed to eat that spleen or the kidney, even though the spleen or the kidney is the mother itself, and the fetus, we're saying, is not the body of the mother, and yet the shechita is matir, the fetus is matir the arm, and yet when you cut off a piece of the spleen or the kidney and you shech the mother, you can't eat that spleen or the kidney. So the rabbis want to argue that shechita is actually more effective for something that is not the body of the mother itself, more so than something that is the body of the mother itself, and therefore they argue that shechting the mother would be matir the aver min ha'uber, lifachot, that it should not be nevela, it should be considered treifa shchuta, but you would not be able to eat it. Now friends, in that brisa that we just quoted, Reb Meir just casually slipped in a very tricky concept and sugya that is now going to be our focus for the rest of the daf. Reb Meir had said to the Chacham, when making his argument, that look, I understand why shechita will be matir a treifa, right? For example, hole in the lung, because when it comes to treifa, it's an issue with the animal itself. But he gave another example, that shechita is also matir aver ameduldal, a limb that is dangling off of an animal. A limb that is dangling off of an animal. What is this sugya? This is a sugya about, it's going to come up in Perika or Ve'arote, that aver ameduldal is that you have a limb, let's say a leg, that is completely severed from the animal. It's completely severed from the animal, but it's hanging on by a thread. There's zero chance that this is ever going to be reconstituted with the rest of the animal. It's not going to heal. It's not going to heal. It's dangling by a thread. It's dangling by a thread. And then the animal dies, the animal is shechted. The question is, how do we treat this limb? Do we treat it like Ever Menachai? Does Shechita work for it? Does Shechita not work for it? So says Reb Meir, so in this brisa, Reb Meir was comparing this Ever Ameduldal to a treifa, and saying that just like by a treifa, Shechita is matir, Shechita is mitayr, said it shouldn't be nevela. So also by the Ever Ameduldal, there's also basar ameduldal, which we'll get to, but by the Ever Ameduldal, Shechita is mitayrit, said it should not be nevela. And Reb Meir is arguing that that's because it's the body of the animal itself. The treifa, like a hole in the lung, is an issue with the animal itself that you're shechting. So also if you shecht an animal and it has a limb that's hanging on by a thread, he says also the shechita is going to be mitayrit, said it should not be nevela. Okay. Now, continues the Gemara. Amr B'Shim Ben Lakish says V'Shlakish ki machlokes be'ubarin kach machlokes be'evarin. What's ubarin? What's evarin? Ubar is aver min ha'ubar, like we've been discussing until now. aver mina ubar. You got an oo, and inside the oo there's a fetus, and the fetus pops out its arm. That arm is aver mina ubar, a limb from a fetus. And avarim here is referring to aver ameduldol, a limb that has been severed from an animal and is dangling on by a thread. So uber is aver mina uber, and avar is aver ameduldol. So says Rish Lakish, says Rish Lakish that the machlokes is identical. Just like we saw in our Mishnah by aver mina uber. All right, get used to these terminologies. Aver mina uber is what we're talking about in our Mishnah, the fetus that pops out its arm. So just like there's a machlokes between the Chachamim and Reb Meir when it comes to aver mina uber, Reb Meir says that even after Shechita, it is still Tameh, it's Nevela, whereas the Chacham say that Shechita is Mitaher, the Aver min Uber. The same machlokas applies to Aver Ameduldal, a dangling limb. Says Rish Lakish that if you shech that animal, according to Reb Meir, it remains that Aver Ameduldal is Tameh. According to the Chachamim, that Aver Ameduldal is Tahor. Identical machlokas. Rabbi Yechanan Omar, whereas Rabbi Yechanan says machlokes be'aver de uber, the machlokes, of course, as we've seen in our Mishnah, is by the aver of the uber. That Reb Meir says it's tameh, and the Chacham say it's tar when you shech the mother. Aval be'aver de be'ema divrakol shchita ose nipol. But when it comes to the aver ameduldal, and you shecht the animal that has his dangling limb that's holding on by a thread, says Reb Yochanan that everyone agrees that by Aver Meduldal, Shechita Ose Nipol. What does Shechita Ose Nipol mean? It means that when you shecht the animal, it's as though this Aver Meduldal, this limb that's been severed and is holding on by a thread, it's as if it fell off completely right before the Shechita, i.e., Aver min achai, right? If a limb completely falls off of a live animal, it's Aver min achai. It's be'etzim tami tumas nevela. We're going to see a little bit later a little bit of a nafkamina between Aver min achai and nevela. But for now, we can refer to it as nevela. It's fine. It certainly has, when it's tami, it has tumas nevela. Let's just talk about it in that way. We don't need to add more to what we already need to work with. For now, Aver min achai is tamei tumas nevela. So shchita osa nipol means that when you shecht this animal that has an aver ameduldal, we view it as though the aver was completely severed just before the shchita, and therefore it is aver min achai and it is tamei. So according to Rabbi Yochanan, Rabbi Yochanan says, of course, as we see in our Mishnah, by aver min uber, there's a machlokes that Reb Meir says that when you shech the mother, the aver min uber is tameh, and the Chacham say it's tahor. But when it comes to aver ameduldal, everyone agrees, even the Chacham agree, that shchita ose nipol, and that we view it as the limb completely fell off just before the shchita, and it's aver min achai, and therefore everyone agrees, tameh. Again, says Rish Lakish that the same machlokes, Reb Meir says tamid, Chacham say tar, the same machlokes applies both to aver mina uber as well as to aver ameduldal. Rabbi Yechanan Omer says Rabbi Yechanan machlokes be'aver de uber, that no, as we saw in the Mishnah, the machlokes by aver de uber, that when you shech the mother, Reb Meir says tamid, the Chacham say tar, but aval be'aver de behema, when it comes to aver ameduldal, Divrei Akol, everyone agrees that when you shech the mother, when you shech the animal with the aver ameduldal, shchita osa nipol, that we view it as if the limb fell off just before the shchita, right? Shchita osa nipol. Nipol means that it had already fallen off. That when you shecht it, we view it as though the limb has already fallen off, and it's aver min achai. Everyone agrees about this, i.e., it's tamei tumas nevela. Omer Reb Yossi Bar Chanina, says Reb Yossi Bar Chanina, my time with Reb Yechanan, why Why does Rabbi Yochanan say that the rabbis changed their opinion? Right? Rabbi Yochanan is saying that, look, there's a machlokes when it comes to Eivra Mina Uber, as we saw in our Mishnah, but when it comes to Eivra Meduldal, the rabbis changed their opinion. Whereas by Eivra Mina Uber, they said that the Shechita is mitayr, the Eivra Mina Uber. But when it comes to Eivra Meduldal, they say that Shechita Osenipol, that it's Eivra Mina Chai, that it's Tameh. Why the change of perspective? What is different about the Eivra Mina Uber than the Eivra Meduldal? So says Rabbi Yosef Bar Chanina, Hay isle takante b'chazor ve'ho leisle takante b'chazor. The difference is, if you remember at the beginning of the parak, there was a machlokes between Rav and Rabbi Yochanan that when it comes to a fetus that pops out its arm and then brings it back into the mother, and then you shech the mother. According to Rav, you're not allowed to eat the arm, even though it unpopped it, even though it returned it back inside the mother. According to Rav, when you shech the mother, you can't eat that arm. According to Rabbi Yochanan, you could eat the arm. Chazara, when it pops out its arm, if you shech the mother, then you can't eat it. But if it brings it back into the mother, and then you shech the mother, you can eat it. So therefore, that's the shit of Rabbi Yochanan. So the reason why Rabbi Yochanan says that when it comes to Eivra Meduldal, and you shecht the animal, the limb is tameh, whereas by Eivra Mina Uber it's tar, it's because by Eivra Mina Uber there is a concept of chazara. If it would have pulled its leg back into, or its arm, whatever, its limb back into the mother, it would have been completely, you can even eat it, according to Rabbi Yochanan. So therefore the Chacham said, look, when it comes to Eivra Mina Uber, if it did not pull its limb back in, if it remained dangling out, when you shech the mother, at least it's mitayr the limb. You can't eat it, but at least it's mitayr, it's not nevela. And it's more lenient in that the Shechita is mitayr, the Eivra Mina Uber, and we're more lenient there because if it would have even pulled it back in, we would have even been able to eat it. But when it comes to the Eivra Meduldal, there's no way to fix it. This is a limb that's hanging on by a thread. It's been completely severed. It's never going to heal. And therefore, we're just kind of stuck with this situation. And the Shechita is not going to be mitayr it. We're going to view it as if it completely fell off just before the Shechita. It's Eivra Mina Chai, and it is tameh. So again, Rabbi Yosef Bar Chanina, my time with Rabbi Yochanan, Liba Rabbanan, Rabbi Yochanan, who says that according to the rabbis, when it comes to Eivra Meduldal, Shechita is not going to be mitayr, it's going to remain tameh. Hay isle takante b'chazor, because Eivra Mina Uber has a way to be fixed. It could bring its leg back in and be completely fixed. You can eat the limb after the Shechita of the mother. There is no way to fix the Eivra Meduldal. Therefore, when you shecht the animal, the Eivra Meduldal is tameh meisvei. But one second, we have a question. What did Reb Meir, where did this curveball come in? The curveball came in when Reb Meir had responded to the Chachamim, and they said, one second, I can understand why shechting an animal that's treif can be mitayr it, because the treifa is in the animal itself. I can also understand when it comes to Eivra Meduldal, why shechting the animal, it's mitayr the Eivra Meduldal, because once again, it's the animal itself. Wait a second, but Reb Meir just said, did we just hear that right? Reb Meir says that shechting the animal is mitayr the Eivra Meduldal. According to who? According to Rish Lakish, the machlokes by the Eivra Mina Uber is the same machlokes by the Eivra Meduldal. Reb Meir says tameh. The Chacham say tar, but Reb Meir, why is Reb Meir then saying that shechting the animals mitayr the Eivra Meduldal? And according to Rabbi Yochanan, everyone agrees by Eivra Meduldal that it's Tameh. So why is Reb Meir saying in the Brisa that by shechting the animal, it's Mitayr, the Eivra Meduldal? First of all, both according to Rish Lakish and according to Reb Yochanan, Reb Meir says that it's Tameh. And according to Reb Yochanan, according to everybody, it's Tameh. So what's going on here? Reb Meir says to Chacham, Tiara Shechitas Treifa Osa, that when we say that Shechita of an animal is Mitayr a Treifa, Vesa Eivra Meduldal, or if it has a limb that's dangling off, it will be Mitayr that limb. Dover Shegufa, because the Treifa, the punctured lung, the limb that's dangling off, is the animal itself. So I can understand why Shechita would be Mitayr it. Titayr is a Uber Dover Sheinu Gufa, but the Eivra Mina Uber is not the animal itself. It's an organism growing inside the animal. So it says Rav Meir, the Shechita would not be Mitayr the Eivra Mina Uber. So Bishlam, the Reb Shimon ben Lakish, okay, at least I can understand according to Rish Lakish. According to Rish Lakish, just like there's a machlokes by Eivra Mina Uber, the Chacham say Tar, Rav Meir says Tameh, it's the same machlokes by Eivra Meduldal. Rav Meir says that the shechting the animal, the Eivra Meduldal is Tameh, but that's what Rav Meir says, but the Chacham say it's Tahor. Okay, fine. So I can understand, I could give a pshat over here. That even though Rav Meir says that shechting an animal is not Mitayr the Eivra Meduldal, but he's just, after all, he's responding to the Chacham. So he's responding to the Chacham and saying, look, I understand that your opinion is that when it comes to an Eivra Meduldal, when you shecht the animal, it's Mitayr the Eivra Meduldal. But okay, the Eivra Meduldal is the animal itself. I can understand that. I disagree, but I can understand why you say that. When it comes to Eivra Mina Uber, however, I can't understand why you say that. It's a different organism. So, B'Shlam Reb Shimon Lakish, I can understand Rish Lakish. The Devreim Kamerlu, Reb Meir is just responding to the Chachamim when he says that the Shechita of an animal is Mitayr the Eivra Meduldal. L'didi loshna Eivra de Uber v'loshna Eivra de Be'ema. According to me, I have the same opinion whether we're talking about Eivra Mina Uber or Eivra Meduldal. I say it's Tameh. Ki adadininu. Where am I? V'loshna Eivra de Uber v'loshna Eivra de Be'ema. Wait, what? First time, Shimon Lakish the Devreim Kamerlu L'didi Loshna Eivra de Uber v'loshna Eivra de Be'ema Ki adadininu. Okay, I don't know how to read that. Why am I struggling to read that? For some, the Shimon ben Lakish the Devreim Kamerlu L'didi Loshna Eivra de Uber v'loshna Eivra de Be'ema Ki adadininu. Okay, fine, they're the same. Okay, and Be'etzim is just respond right. Reb Meir is saying I say the same thing in both cases, but according to you, that you say that it is tahor by the Eivra Meduldal, I can understand why it's tahor by the Eivra Meduldal. According to you, that you said it's tahor by the Eivra Meduldal, that shechting the animals Mitayr the Eivra Meduldal. That's because it's the animal itself. But I don't understand how you could say that by the Eivra Mina Uber, which is a different organism. Fine. So I understand according to Rish Lakish. So when Reb Meir says that the Eivra Meduldal is tahor, it's dafka, he disagrees, but he's saying that according to the Rabbanan who he's speaking to. But El Reb Yochanan, kasha. But according to Reb Yochanan, how would we understand the Brisa? According to Reb Yochanan, he says that when it comes to Eivra Meduldal, everyone agrees that Shechita Osa Nipo, that right before, just before you shecht it, we view it as if the limb fell off, and it's Eivra Mina Chai, and it's Tameh, and everyone agrees to this. So when Reb Meir says that when it comes to Eivra Meduldal, I can understand why Shechita is Mitayr because it's the body itself. According to Reb Meir, nobody actually says that. Everyone agrees, Shechita Osa Nipo, that just before you shecht it, we view it as if the limb fell off, and it's Eivra Mina Chai, and it's Tameh. Everyone agrees it's Tameh according to Reb Yochanan. So then how does he understand the Brisa where Reb Meir is saying that I can understand Why Aver Madudal, that Shechita of an animal is Mitayr and Aver Madudal, according to who? So Elo, so says the Gemara, Eli Itmar, Achi Itmar, rather we have to explain the machlokes between Rish Lakish and Rabbi Yochanan the following way. Rabbi Shimon ben Lakish ke machlokes bubarim kach machlokes be'evarim. Rish Lakish doesn't change. Rish Lakish is the same. That just like there's a machlokes by Aver mina uber, there's the same machlokes by Aver meduldo. Even after Shechita, Reb Meir says Tamei, Chacham say Tar. Reb Yochanan Amar says Reb Yochanan machlokes be'Aver de uber. Okay, the machlokes, of course, is by the Aver mina uber, as we know from our Mishnah, that when you shech the mother, Reb Meir says that Aver mina uber is Tamei. The Chacham say it's like a Shefer Shchuta and it's Torah, right? Reb Meir says Tamei, Chacham say Torah. Aval be'Aver de behema, when it comes to Aver ameduldo, divrei akol ein Shechita osa nipol. But when it comes to Aver ameduldo, everyone agrees that we don't say Shechita osa nipol. We don't say that just before you shecht it, it's considered like it fell off and it's Aver min achai. We don't say that. Rather, what we do say, according to Rabbi Yochanan, is that everyone agrees, even Reb Meir agrees, that when you shecht an animal, it's mitayr, the Aver hameduldo. Omer Rabbi Yosef Reb Chinin, and says Rabbi Yosef Reb Chinin, my time how come? My time to Rabbi Yochanan, leave it to Reb Meir. According to Rabbi Yochanan, how come Reb Meir changed his mind by the Aver hameduldo to say that it's tahor? Hai gufa v'alav gufa. Because the Aver hameduldo is the animal itself, whereas the Aver min ha'uber is a different organism. It's a fetus that's growing inside of the animal. It's a different organism, and it says Reb Meir, it is tamei. So, according to Rabbi Yochanan, according to this version, when it comes to Aver min ha'uber, Reb Meir says that when you shech the mother, it is not mitayr the Aver min ha'uber, because it's a different organism, so it's tamei. But when it comes to Aver hameduldo, when it comes to a limb that's dangling off of an animal, Reb Meir would agree with the Chachamim that by shechting the animal would be mitayr the Aver hameduldo. Both Reb Meir and the Chachamim agree that it's tahor. And now I can understand that brisa when Reb Meir says that, look, when it comes to Aver hameduldo, when you shech the animal, it's matir and mitayr the Aver hameduldo because it's the animal itself. But when it comes to the Aver min ha'uber, it's a different organism. Argues Reb Meir that the Shechita of the mother would not be mitayr the Aver min ha'uber. Amar Yitzchak bar Yosef, and it says Rabbi Yitzchak bar Yosef, this is how I want to read it as like a colon. I prefer to read it that way. Instead of Amar Yitzchak bar Yosef, Amar Rabbi Yochanan, because Rabbi Yitzchak bar Yosef sounds like he's in a Morah in Babble. Why would he be quoting Rabbi Yochanan? I want to read it in the following way. I don't know. Maybe I'm right. Maybe I'm wrong. It doesn't make that much of a difference. Amar Rabbi Yitzchak bar Yosef, says Rabbi Yitzchak bar Yosef, Amar Rabbi Yochanan, that says Rabbi Yochanan like the second version. Hakol modim shemisa osa nipol ve'ein shchita osa nipol. Okay. So it says Rabbi Yitzchak bar Yosef that according to Rabbi Yochanan, he's saying that everyone agrees that when it comes to Aver hameduldo, misa osa nipol, that if the animal dies, it's not shechted, but poshet dies, so osa nipol. We would then view the Aver hameduldo as if it fell off prior to Shechita, and it would be not Shechita, to its dying, and it would be Aver min achai, and it would be Tomei Tumas Nevela. Ve'ein Shechita osa nipol, but if the animal is shechted, we won't say that it's nipol. We won't say that the limb fell off and that it's Aver min achai. If you shecht the animal, the Aver hameduldo is tahor. Again, Rav Yitzchak bar Yosef says, Rav Yitzchak bar Yosef, Rav Yochanan, Kol modim, everyone agrees, according to Rav Yochanan, Shemisa osanipol, that when it comes to misa, an animal that dies, osanipol will view the limb as though it fell off and it's ever minachai and it's tameh. However, ve'en shechita osanipol, when it comes to shechita, if you shech the animal, so we won't view it as if the limb fell off. Rather, the limb is tor. If you shech the animal, it's mitayer the aver ameduldul. B'maya skinon. Now, what are we talking about? Ilim be'aver de uber. So, if we want to say that Rabbi Yochanan's statement about misa osa nipol as opposed to shchita and ain't shchita osa nipol, if we say it's talking about aver min uber mipalik plige, well, that can't be. Can't be talking about the aver min uber, because they argue about that, right? Obviously, we saw in our Mishnah, there's a machlokes between Remeir and the Chacham by Aver Mina Uber, that even if you shech the mother, Remeir still says it's tameh. So we can't say that everyone agrees that it would be Torah. So Ella be'aver de be'ema. So rather, we're talking about Aver Ameduldul. And we're saying that everyone agrees by Aver Ameduldul. If you shecht the animal, the Aver Ameduldul is tahor. But I don't understand what Rabbi Yochanan is saying, because Misa Tanina, Shechita Tanina. Meaning Rabbi Yitzchak Bar Yosef is saying that according to Rabbi Yochanan, let's read it again. Rabbi Yitzchak Bar Yosef, Rabbi Yochanan, Akol Modim, everybody agrees on the following two things. Shemisa osa nipol, v'she'ein shechita osa nipol. That if it dies, the Aver Ameduldul is tameh, and if it's shechted, the Aver Ameduldul is tahor. But what's the big chiddush? It's a Mishnah. It's a Mishnah in the 9th perek of Masechta Chullin, perek Haor V'Arotev. Says the Gemara, Misa Tanina, Shechita Tanina. The fact that Misa is osa nipol and Ein Shechita osa nipol, both of these halachis we already know from a Mishnah in Perek Ha'or V'Arotev. Misa Tanina, the Mishnah where we learn that Misa Osa Nipol is Mesa HaBehema, if the animal dies, HaBosser Tzarich Hechsher Ve'Aver Mitame Mishum Aver Min HaChai Ve'enu Mitame Mishum Aver Min HaNevela Divra Meir. Wow. Wow. Wow, 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 wow. What just happened there? A lot. Okay, let's talk. So in that Mishnah, it's talking about not just Aver HaMeduldul, but also Basar HaMeduldul. Not just Aver HaMeduldul, but also Basar HaMeduldul. What's the lashon of the Mishnah there in Daf Kuf Chav Zayin Amud Beis? Aver v'abasar meduldalin. Yeah, okay, great, perfect. So that Mishnah is talking about Aver v'abasar meduldalin. Aver meduldal, basar meduldal. Aver meduldal is that you have a limb that's dangling on by a thread. It's betzim severed, it's holding on by a thread. That's Aver meduldal. Basar meduldal is the same thing, but with meat. You have a piece of steak that is hanging on by a thread. Our friend Reb Neil gave us a little bit of a science lesson the other day. Ligaments, tendons. One of those is I don't know. Maybe this involves ligaments and tendons. I don't know. But you have a limb that's dangling on somehow, maybe by so Reb Neil taught us that, oh boy, let's see if I can remember. One of them is, I think, oh boy. One of them I think is bone to bone, one of them I think is bone to meat. Which one's which? I don't know, maybe ligament is bone to bone and... Okay, Chev, if you have medical... If you need to see a doctor, go to Reb Neil, don't go to me, okay? If you want to listen to Babble on Talmud, I'm here. I'll go upon him. So where were we? Okay. So we have a scenario where you have an animal with a limb dangling off and an animal with some meat dangling off. Now, there's a difference between the two. The difference between the two is that a limb that completely falls off of an animal is Aver Min HaChai. meat that completely falls off of an animal, a chunk of meat that completely falls off of an animal, is basar min achai. The difference between Eiver min achai and basar min achai is that Eiver min achai is tameh, like a nevela, it's an avatuma. Basar min achai is tahor. Eiver min achai is tameh, basar min achai is tahor. So when you have a situation of Eiver Meduldal, where it's hanging on by a thread, and you have Basar Meduldal, where you have meat hanging on by a thread, so we're saying if the animal dies, drops dead, so in terms of the meat, it's tahor. The meat is tahor. Now, it could become tameh, if a dead sheretz falls on it, let's say, it could become tameh, but it would have to be mukhshel lekabel tumah. One of the 7 liquids would have to fall on it first. It would have to come in contact with a liquid, and then it would be mukhshel lekabel tumah, and then it could become tameh tumas ochlin. But until then, it's tahor, right? As we just said, right? Mesa tanina, that when it comes to an animal that dies, we already learned about it from a Mishnah in Perka or Varotiv. Mesa habeim, if the animal dies, habasar, when it comes to the meat, basar ameduldal, meat that was dangling on by a thread, and then the animal dies, tzarich hechsher, it's tahor. And if it's going to become tameh with tumas ochlin, right, we'll treat this meat as ochel, as food that could become tameh. If let's say a dead sheretz falls on it, it could become tameh. But it would need tzarich hechsher. It would first have to be mukhshel lekabel tumah. Okay, and what about the Eiver Ameduldal? The Eiver, in terms of the Eiver Ameduldal, when the animal drops dead, mitami mishum Eiver min achai, it's going to be tameh as Eiver min achai, i.e., essentially misa osen nipol. That if the animal drops dead, we're going to view it as if the Eiver Ameduldal fell off completely just before it died, and we're going to treat the Eiver Ameduldal as Eiver min achai. Ve'enu mitami mishum Eiver min nevela, but it's not mitami as Eiver min nevela. That's the opinion of Reb Meir. What's the difference between Eiver min achai and Eiver min nevela? They're very similar. There's just one difference. First of all, what is Eiver min achai versus Eiver min nevela? Eiver min achai is a limb that falls off of a live animal. Now you have this limb, it's been severed, it's Eiver min achai. Eiver min nevela is that if you have an animal that drops dead, and then a limb gets severed off from that. Now both are in avatuma, both are metame like nevela. What's the difference? The difference is if a kizayis of meat is separated from the limb. If we're talking about Eiver min achai, so while the limb itself, Eiver min achai, is metame like nevela, but if a kizayis of meat gets separated from the limb, well then it's essentially basar min achai. As we said before, it's tahor. Basar min achai is tahor. So just like basar min achai is tahor, if a kizayis of meat gets separated from the Eiver min achai, so Eiver min achai is bone, limb, tendons, bone, meat, tendons. But if a kizayis of meat gets separated from that, it's tahor like basar min achai. But when we're talking about Eiver min nevela, so then nevela is nevela, and even if a kizayis of meat from nevela or from a limb of nevela makes no difference, it's also tameh as nevela. So that's the difference between Eiver min achai and Eiver min nevela. That while both of them are tameh as an avatuma, the difference is if a kizayis of meat gets separated from the Eiver min achai, it's tahor. If a kizayis of meat gets separated from Eiver min nevela, it is tameh. Let's read it inside again. So when it comes to, we said, right, misa tanino, when we say that misa ose nipol, we already have a Mishnah that says it, because mesa, if this animal that has Eiver ameduldal or basar ameduldal, if the mesa abeim, if the animal dies, habasar tzarich hechsher, so the basar ameduldal, we said it's tahor, it can become tameh with tumas ochlin if it had hechsher tuma, if it came in contact with one of the 7 liquids. The Aver, and in terms of the Aver Ameduldul, when the animal dies, Mitame Mishum Aver Min Achai. It's going to be Aver Min Achai, because Misa Osa Nipol. We're going to treat it as though the limb fell off just before the animal died, and it's Aver Min Achai, and it's an Avatuma. Ve'enu Mitame Mishum Aver Min Nevela. It's not Aver Min Nevela, it's Aver Min Achai. We said the only nafkamina is if a kazayas of meat gets separated from it, it will be tahor if it's Aver Min Achai, but tamei if it's Aver Min Nevela. Divra Meir, this is the opinion of Meir, and nobody really argues on this. Certainly the Chacham agree with this. So Meir and the Chacham are both in agreement that when it comes to Aver Ameduldul, that if the animal dies, we would say Misa Ose Nipo. And Shechita Nami Tanina, and we said that in terms of Shechita, then we say Shechita Eino Ose Nipo, then in terms of Shechita, that Shechita is Metayer, the Aver Ameduldul. Nami Tanina, we also learn in that same Mishnah that Nishchita, if the animal is shechted, Nishchita Behema, if the animal is shechted, Huchsheru B'damea Divrei Reb Meir, says Reb Meir that if the animal is shechted, so you have this animal with an Aver Ameduldul, and the animal is shechted, says Reb Meir, Huchsheru B'damea. Essentially, by shechting the animal, both the basar but also the Aver Ameduldul are tahor, and the blood of the Shechita is machshir the meat to be mikabel tuma, whether we're talking about the meat or whether we're talking about the Aver Ameduldul. The blood is machshir to be mikabel tumas ochlin, but the meat and the basar Ameduldul and the Aver Ameduldul, when the animal is shechted, are tahor. And the dam is machshir lekabel tuma. Reb Shimon Omer lo uchshru. Okay, Reb Shimon disagrees with whether or not the dam is machshir the meat lekabel tuma, but everyone agrees that the Shechita eino ose nipol, that when the animal is shechted, the Aver Ameduldul is tahor. No. And that's the opinion of Reb Meir. Even Reb Meir is saying that the Aver Ameduldul is tahor when it comes to the Shechita, and certainly the Chacham agree as well. So, Rav Yitzchak Bar Yosef had come and said that according to Rabbi Yochanan, that if you have an animal with the Aver Ameduldul, if it dies, the Aver Ameduldul is tamei. If it's shechted, the Aver Ameduldul is tahor. Everyone agrees. Rav Meir, the Chachamim. But this is Mishnah. We have a Mishnah in Perek Or Varov that tells us this. So answers the Gemara, if I only had that Mishnah in Perek Or Varotev, Havamina, my huchshru. When we say that the meat is tahor, and that when it's shechted, the dam of the Shechita is machshir lekabel tuma, abasar. I might think it's only talking about the basar Ameduldul. What do you mean? I might think it's only talking about the basar Ameduldul and not the Aver Ameduldul. It says huchshru, that's plural. It's talking about multiple things. What's multiple things? Obviously the basar Ameduldul and even the Aver Ameduldul. Ma'udetema, I may have thought chad lebasar aporish min abehema v'chad lebasar aporish min ha'aver. Well, I may have said no. You know what plural is? Plural is referring to the basar Ameduldul, that the dam is machshir, the basar Ameduldul lekabel tuma. And the other thing that it's machshir is that so I could have thought to argue that in the Mishnah when it says, so when you shecht the animal, so maybe the Aver Ameduldul is in fact tamei, but we said it's tamei as Aver Min Achai, not Aver Min Nevela. And the nafkamina is that if a kazayas of meat is separated from the Aver Min Achai, it's tahor. So I may have thought to say that in the Mishnah, when it says that if you shech the animal, huchsharu, that the meat is tahor and the blood is machshir l'kabel tumah, I may have thought that what huchsharu plural is referring to is the basar amadodol, and also a kazayis of meat that got separated from the aver amadodol. Those two are tahor, and the dam is machshir l'kabel tumah. But maybe the aver amadodol is actually tameh. Umay, umay, dehai mehai. Why would I need to teach that? Why is a kazayis of meat that's separated from the aver amadodol any different than simply basar amadodol? Why would I have to teach those two separately? That in both cases the dam is machshir l'kabel tumah. Why would I think that one is any different than the other? Well, I'll tell you why. Because I may have thought to say, hoyel umitame tuma chamura agav oviv. Well, I may have thought the following. I may have thought that actually the aver amadodol is tameh. That you have an animal with the aver amadodol, and you shech the animal, and the aver amadodol is tameh. Now, its tameh is an avatuma. Now, this kazayis of meat that got separated from the aver amadodol, I may have thought that, well, this kazayis of meat, when it was still connected to the aver amadodol, was mitame as an avatuma. Maybe when it gets separated from the aver amadodol, it actually doesn't need a hechsher to be mekabel tumah. If a dead sheretz falls on it, even if it wasn't muchshir l'kabel tumah, it should still become tamei tumas ochlin, because after all, it's more chomer, because when it was connected to the aver amadodol, it was mitame as an avatuma, masha einkin the basar amadodol. So I may have thought that while the basar amadodol, if the animal is shechted, when the animal is shechted, we're saying the basar amadodol requires a hechsher l'kabel tumah. But maybe a kazayis of meat that was separated from the basar amadodol wouldn't need a hechsher tumah, right, to become in contact with one of the 7 liquids. So I may have thought kamaj malan that what the Mishnah is coming to teach us, that if the animal with the aver amadodol was shechted, I may have thought that what the Mishnah is saying is that the aver amadodol is tameh, but the basar amadodol is tahor, as well as a kazayis of meat that may have gotten separated from the aver amadodol, because it's tameh as aver min achai, and a kazayis of meat that separates from it is tahor. And I may have thought that what the Mishnah is saying is that both the basar amadodol and a kazayis of meat that got separated from the aver amadodol are muchshir l'kabel tumah from the blood of the shechita. Maybe that's what it's saying, but the aver amadodol itself is tameh. Therefore, I need Rabbi Yochanan to clarify for me, and that's where Rabbi Yitzchak bar Yosef is coming to say that Rabbi Yochanan is clarifying, don't say that, but rather that ein shechita osenipo, that shechita ein osenipo. What's his lashon? The ein shechita osenipo. That when you shech the animal, we don't view it as if the leg fell off, the aver amadodol fell off just before the shechita. We don't view it as aver min achai. Rather comes Rabbi Yochanan to clarify that the shechita is actually mitaher the aver amadodol, and that when the animal is shechted, the blood from the shechita is machshir both the basar amadodol and the aver hamadodol to be able to be mekabel tumas ochlin. That's why I needed Rabbi Yochanan to clarify for us that the shechita is mitayer the aver hamadodol. Rav Yosef says, Rav Yosef nikot Rav Yitzchak bar Yosef biyodcho. Says Rav Yosef that Rav Yitzchak bar Yosef go with him, go with his shita. That according to Rabbi Yochanan, everyone agrees that when it comes to aver hamadodol, when you shech the animal, the aver hamadodol is Torah. Even Reb Meir agrees with this. Remember, there were two shitas of two ways to understand the machlokes between Rish Lakish and Rabbi Yochanan. According to the first way, Rabbi Yochanan says that everyone agrees that when the animal is shechted, the aver hamadodol is tameh. According to the second reading, we said no. Rabbi Yochanan is saying that when the animal is shechted, everyone agrees that the Eiver Meduldal is Torah. And says Rav Yosef, that's the version you should go with, except Rav Yitzchak Bar Yosef, who explained that, who clarified that according to Rav Yochanan, everyone agrees that Ein Shechita Osa Nipol, that when you shech the animal, the Eiver HaMeduldal is Torah. The Rav Bar Bachana Koi Kavose, because Rav Bar Bachana agrees with, is consistent with Rav Yitzchak Bar Yosef's version. The Tanya that we learned in the Brisa, Uvasur Basad Treifa Lo Sochelu, that if you have treifa, don't eat it. Lahavi comes to include Ha'ever V'Abasur HaMeduldalin, a limb that is dangling off or meat that's dangling off, by behema v'chai v'of, by an animal, behema, a chaya, or a bird, ushchatan, that were shechted, shehein asurin, that they are asurin. That when it says ubasar basad treifa lo sochelu, it's coming to include that basar meduldal, Eiver meduldal are asur. From Rabbi Bachana, Rabbi Yochanan says Rabbi Bachana, ein boin ela mitzvahs parosh levad. That when we say that Eiver meduldal and basar meduldal are asur by an animal that's shechted, right? It says, right, ushchaton shein asurin. It's only midrabanan. Midoraisa, the shechita is mitayer, the Eiver meduldal and the basar meduldal. Midoraisa, this limb that was hanging on by a thread, this meat that was hanging on by a thread, when you shech the animal, you can eat it. It's tar midoraisa. In boin ela mitzvahs prosh bilvad, there's a mitzvah derabanan of staying away from them, don't eat them. Midirabanan. And in terms of that pasuk of also basad treifa lo sochelu, it's just an asmachta. So says Rabbi Bar Bachana that really the shechita is mitayer the Eiver HaMeduldal, both according to Reb Meir and according to the Chachamim. Whoa. But who's still with me? That was tricky, right? Sheesh. Well, I'll tell you, it took me the whole day yesterday just to learn this like half an Amud. I was hoping to learn Daf Ayin Daled yesterday as well, because Tisha B'Av is coming. I really hope that Mashiach comes before Tisha B'Av this year, because I don't know when I'm going to get in an extra daf before then. There's no learning on Tisha B'Av. There's no preparing Babble on Talmud for a Tisha B'Av, and yet there is a daf that day. So I always have to get ahead. I was hoping yesterday I was going to get ahead, but it took me a whole day just to learn this sugya. Just another reminder, if you have any questions, if you want me to clarify anything on this topic, I tried to obviously explain it as the best as I could, but I hope I didn't make any mistakes or anything, but it's tricky stuff. If anybody has any questions, of course I'm available. I'm happy to answer any questions. Let us know in the WhatsApp group. I'm happy to answer. Chevra, on Daf Ayin Gimel of Masechta Chullin, the very tricky Ayin Gimel of Masechta Chullin, we learned about Shechita vis-à-vis a poked out fetus limb. That was really just an elaboration on our Mishnah, the machlokas between the Chachamim and Reb Meir when it comes to Eiver min Uber. Reb Meir says it's Tameh, the Chachamim say it's Tahor, and a little bit of the dialogue between them about that machlokas. Now, within that dialogue, Reb Meir had sort of casually mentioned basar meduldal, Eiver meduldal, that when you shecht an animal, the Eiver meduldal is tahor, and that casual mention segued us into the very complex sugya of Eiver meduldal, which we then discussed Shechita vis-à-vis a dangling limb. So we saw that the Shita of Rish Lakish is that the machlokas is the same for both. That just like Reb Meir is mitame Eiver min ha'ubar and the Chacham are mitayer, the same thing applies to Eiver meduldal. When you shech the animal, Reb Meir says tameh and the Chacham say tahor. But we saw two opinions of two versions of Reb Yochanan. In the first version, everyone agrees that when it comes to Eiver meduldal, when you shech the animal, it's tameh. However, we asked questions based on the Brisa where Meir says that it's tahor. So then we had a different version where Rabbi Yochanan says that everyone agrees that by Eivah Meduldal, when you shech the animal, it is in fact tahor. We then saw the Shechita of Rav Yitzchak Bar Yosef, who quoted Rabbi Yochanan to say that Ein Shechita Ose Nipo, which essentially means that when you shech the animal, the Eivah Meduldal is tahor. We said what exactly he's teaching. It's a Mishnah already in Or Varotev, but ultimately, Beseder. That was the concept when it comes to Eivah HaMeduldal. There was a machlokes between Rish Lakish and Reb Yochanan by Eivah HaMeduldal. If Reb Yochanan, if Reb Meir Be'etzim says that it's tahor, like the Chacham, or that he still maintains that it's tamei, like he does by Eivah Mina Uber. Friends, that was Daf Ayin Gimel, Daf 73 of Masechta Chullin. Again, if you have any questions, I'm happy to answer them. Have a great, great, great day. Cheers.